Okay, good morning, everyone. We are going to get started. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stephen Gitsoyan, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni and Family Relations at Cal Lutheran. On behalf of the Alumni and Family Relations team, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the chat box in the Zoom menu. We will have dedicated time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. When you joined the meeting today, your video was off and your microphone was muted. There's no need to change these settings during the presentation to help us avoid any excess noise or disruptions. Finally, this presentation is being recorded and it will be posted on our website for your reference later today. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this morning's presentation. Dr. Banker is a licensed marriage and family therapist and an associate professor of psychology at California Lutheran University. She has been teaching at CLU for 10 years, and for the past 7 years, she directed the CLU Counseling Psychology program. This year, she was recognized as a distinguished educator and was honored with the President's Award of Teaching Excellence. Prior to her work at CLU, she taught medical residents at Dartmouth Medical Residency. Dr. Banker has published research on community trauma, young adult sexuality, best practices for training systemic therapists, and psychotherapy interventions related to women's health. She has presented her research to mental health communities around the world. Most recently, she was asked to present her work in Bangkok, Vancouver, and Rome. Dr. Banker sits on multiple boards and committees nationally and internationally. She holds an appointed seat on the Ventura County Behavioral Health Advisory Board and is currently a volunteer psychotherapist for the California Mental Health Corps to help address mental health needs in California during the COVID-19 surge. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Banker.
Hello. Thank you for all of you that could join us live today. My talk today is on managing family relations during the COVID-19 pandemic. I teach multiple sections of family therapy here at CLU every year. In fact, it's one of my favorite courses to teach. And each year I ask the students to do a quick exercise in the beginning of class. One where I ask them to sort of turn off their critical thinking just for a minute and to tell me what's the first thing that pops into their head when they hear me say the words family relationships. And here are some of the words that typically come up: intimate, messy, hard, complicated, close, and influential. And I tell you these, I think they are really sort of telling words, not only about how smart my students are, which they are, but also that family relationships are often filled with a mix of many different complex feelings and experiences. And during this time of COVID-19, family relationships are ending up to be just as complex. So many of those features are still there, if not intensified. So what we're finding is that during this current pandemic, many of the emotions and feelings that already existed have been sort of brought to light or intensified even more. I'm a relationship specialist. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I do relationship research, and I'm so passionate about the significance of relationships in people's lives because there is one common factor. I tell all of my students and those that I work with that there's sort of one factor that has such a significant impact on physical health, mental health, and just overall reports of happiness, people reporting life satisfaction. And yes, that is relationships. Relationships have a significant impact on our physical health, what happens to us biologically and physiologically. We can literally sort of keep people alive and help their happiness just through our relationships. And the research would show that it is about positive relationships are even better, but it doesn't always have to be the most positive relationship. It just has to be a connection. So what we're looking at is people that have connections versus people that don't have connections. And relationships end up being sort of a force field that protect us against disease and decline. But the opposite is true too. So the lack of relationships in somebody's life or the lack of connection can be really harmful both to our body and our mind. And I think that's important for us to think about during this pandemic because sheltering in and social distancing has been quite a mixed bag for most of us. For some of us, sheltering in is now giving us more time, more and more and more time in close quarters with those that are in our home as well, and maybe sort of less time with the people that we may have been connected with outside of our home. And for some, this time, especially for those that live alone, sheltering in and social distancing has meant sort of isolation or a complete loss of contact with others. So, in a matter of weeks, COVID-19 has sort of transformed our lives and our relationships. So, what I want to talk about today is about family relationships. And maybe, Stephen, if you'll move to the next slide, please. First, I want to acknowledge as we talk about family relationships is the way in which we define relationships or family differs. Okay, so family doesn't always have to refer to people that are blood related or that live in the same household. The significance of the term family and those connections is sort of far reaching. It can mean a lot of different things for a lot of people. So as we talk today, I want us to sort of keep in mind that as we talk about these relationship patterns and what's happening in relationships, that can mean different things for different people. And for some of the people might be experiencing these types of relationship dynamics with people that we might not usually sort of perceive as family, but they really are family to those specific people. And the way that I have done it today, because I have a lot of information and I want to make sure that I can touch on pieces that are important to everyone listening, is I've separated it out between family members. So we're going to talk about them in terms of age or in terms of relationships. And as I go through my slides, on the actual slide, you'll see that I've offered some tips for people in that category to manage during this pandemic. But those tips really are universal. They can go for any age. I've sort of pointed out the ones that are most relevant for that particular age group or that particular relationship. But we're all human and all interconnected. And so really those tips can be used for anyone and any age group. So to begin, I want to start with our youngest family members. And over the past few weeks, I've had the most questions about this age group. I've received lots of emails, calls, texts to ask, how do I help my child during this time? And really, what's happening for children is there's a whole range of experiences. Some children are absolutely making memories right now. The idea that they can be home with family members that maybe they don't normally get to be home with, or having people together, has really sort of changed their outlook and given them some experience that they might not have had a lot of time with before. While for other children, their routine has become really disrupted and their life has become really disrupted. And they may have people in their home that are essential workers. They may have people in their home that are completely overwhelmed and juggling many pieces. And so they are not receiving that attention and are missing some of their routine and some of their connections. So the first thing that I would say related to this age group is that safety and comfort is paramount. When we're thinking about our kids, and again, this sort of applies to all of us in all ages, when we think about our children, our job during a time of unrest, our job during a time of change, transition, some of the uncertainty or unknown for all of us, is the most important piece is to create sort of safety and comfort. None of us function the same without feeling safe. And for children during their developmental ages, it's even more important that they can be safe so that they can sort of continue to grow and thrive. And so to do this, I often tell parents that one of the first things to do is to look at themselves and to see if there's a way that they can manage some of their own feelings and their own sense of calm. Um, Children have an uncanny experience way of sort of picking up on other people's feelings. They are really wonderful at feeling some of their parents' feelings, and so if we can, in the most that we can, right, we have to do the best that we can. If we can manage some of our own feelings and stay calm as we are with our children or as we talk about some of what's happening, they'll pick up on this, and this is what is going to model for them about if this is a safe time or not a safe time and how to handle that. And then we want to offer some kind of message or information about what's going on right now, because at this point, and hopefully many of these conversations have already happened now that we have been sheltered in for more than a month. I think we might be in our 7th week. So at this point, there's already been some conversation, but what is important is that it's open. Everybody's open to talking about this. And many people ask, how do I talk to children about these issues that are more complex, and some of them are very scary? And what we want to do is keep our message as simple as possible. The more brief sort of information and concrete information that we can provide, the better. What we do as adults is sometimes we try to sort of over explain. We want to do that because we're trying to protect or provide comfort. And what happens is the more information that we provide, sometimes we put ideas in children's heads that were never there or something they hadn't thought about. We can sort of increase anxiety. So we want to offer sort of really specific, concrete information, and this is very age dependent. So depending on the age, the younger child, you might say something like, we're trying to keep people healthy and keep them from getting sick, and so we are all being asked to stay home so that we don't get other people's germs, and then allow them to ask questions after that. That can be the extent. And what you find is that in younger kids, a lot of times there's not any additional questions. As children get older and can process some of the information more, they might have more and more questions. And then that's how you're letting them decide how much information is appropriate. Another way is to ask your child questions. So you can ask them, what do they know about this time? What's their understanding of what's happening? And do they have any questions? And that's another way to sort of let them lead and be able to follow with what is sort of appropriate amount of information for them. And then the key to that, as you'll see on the slides, is after that is that we have to stay physically and emotionally available to them. So we can make some of this very specific conversation, but then giving them the feeling and actually following through and staying available to them. Children or adults that feel alone or unattended to can sort of feel even more scared. This can be even a more frightening time for them. Some people that have contacted me about kids have also asked about how to manage their academics during this time. And I say the exact same thing. For kids, safety and comfort is paramount during this time. We have to focus on kids' safety and comfort. And in fact, when we think about sort of a hierarchy of needs or how to sort of meet basic needs before we move to other needs, children won't be able to learn unless they're feeling safe. And so that really has to come first. The other piece is when we talk about the modeling, helping children learn how to manage during difficult times, how to be flexible during sort of unpredictable times is also a huge lesson. So a lot of what we're doing this time is teaching them and is teaching them something really valuable. For those that are really concerned about the academics, I know a lot of places are now, everybody's doing their distance learning, and so they have activities and exercises and lessons that they should be doing. I recommend just finding a sort of realistic expectation for yourself, and if you can tell yourself whatever works best in your household with the amount of time and the amount of resources, if you can give yourself sort of a number that is to help you track that you're sort of staying on top of things. So 2 to 3 activities today have to be educational. One of the times on screen time has to be something educational. There has to be a time where we're reading either with our children or our children's reading, or one of the games that they're playing, in addition to some of their schoolwork. So if you can say that we've done 2 or 3 educational things, give yourself some guidelines, and hopefully that can help you have a better sense of control over the academic piece, and make sure that they're realistic. Um, Routine is something that you'll see next on the slide. Routine is something that we're going to talk about for every single age group. Routine is always recommended anytime that there's stress, transition, something that feels out of control or unpredictable. And it's for those exact reasons. Routine helps us with predictability and a sense of control. And so part of building safety and comfort with our children is sort of making a manageable routine. And similar to the academics, I would just really want to emphasize that you create something that's manageable and realistic. So for some family members, I use that same sort of goal of having 2 or 3 things in your day that are set, if that's manageable for you, or 3 or 4 things. For some families, they might be able to have a full schedule that they try to do consistently. If you can't do that because of work and other responsibilities in your house, if you have 2 or 3 things, so maybe you make it a plan that each day there's going to be some exercise, and maybe you can do that at the same time. Or each day you're going to have one meal that everyone eats together, something that people can sort of predict is going to happen, and help make that manageable. Maybe you have with young children a bedtime routine, and you just always do the bedtime routine for that predictability. And make sure you have everybody in mind, the sort of the parent, the adults, the children. If you have multiple children at different ages, sort of making sure that each of their interests are taken into consideration. And some activities aren't going to fit for everybody, but everybody can still know that we're doing that because it fits for some people in our family. And later we're going to do something else for the other people in our family. And we all have to sort of give and take during this time. And lastly, really quickly, I just want to make a comment about sibling relations. I also have heard that people can struggle with sibling relationships during this time where there is heightened stress, and siblings can be challenging at the best of times. And really, that's so normal, but it can affect sort of the functioning of the family, or how the household feels. And so, as much as possible, if you can create some ground rules in your house that you can always refer back to. What's allowed in this house, what's not allowed in this house. It helps people have that sense of predictability and safety. It can help parents not feeling like they have to take sides or intervene all the time. Instead, parents can just refer back to the ground rules and say, this is what we allow in our house, and what we don't. Okay, so still on children, but I want to move to our teens. And so, Stephen, if you'll, yep, thank you. So for teens, or now coined as our quarantines, right? The main question I receive about our quarantines is families that are struggling because their teens are really wanting to spend time with their peers and their friends, and may even not be following some of the social distancing requirements because of how much they want to spend time with each other. And the first thing I want to comment on is I want to do a quick reminder about development and what's developmentally appropriate for this age group, even when there's not a global pandemic. So even when we're not dealing with a global pandemic, what's happening for teenagers and for our current quarantines. A quick sort of review of brain development and emotional development. As you might know, that for teenagers, the reward part of an adolescent's brain is far, far stronger than their inhibitions. Okay, so for adults, our adult brain is able to sort of feel the signal of caution or inhibition more, because we have some of our frontal lobe is more developed in our brain. But for adolescents, there's less of a signal for that. So rational thinking is more difficult, and emotions tend to dominate. So adolescents can act more emotionally and less rationally, and those of you that have adolescents know this to be true, and it is related to their brain development. So this is the period of time, as we know, that their adolescents are launching some from their family, becoming really focused on peer relationships, and that is exactly opposite of what we're doing during this pandemic. It's the exact opposite to now ask everyone to stay home and to not have as much contact with others. So it really requires a balance of sort of direction, as well as allowing teens and those that are quarantined to um, have some autonomy. And the first comment that I will make about this age group is that it's really important that people have someone they can trust that they're able to speak to. Because for all of us, we have a sense of loss and a sense of losing some of our security or some of our routine, some of our predictability. And so it's really important that we have some of those outlets to manage this experience that we're having. It can be really devastating to not be able to connect with your social groups or go to school or be involved in the activities that you're used to being involved in. And so if those people that you trust, good sources of people to talk to aren't maybe the parents at this time, maybe they need to be outside people, whether that's connecting them with a therapist that can do online telehealth therapy, or other adults that they might be able to connect through via online, or if they have good support groups in their social groups or their peer groups, making sure that that is a part of their life, of who they're talking to about the difficulties that they're experiencing right now. All of us are using media and social media as our primary informant in some way right now. This particular age group can spend a lot of hours engaging in media and social media. And so part of what we need to do during this time of heightened anxiety, as much as possible, is encourage that our adolescents are engaging in sources that are credible. So as we gain information, as we interact social media with people that could potentially heighten the anxiety or increase some of the depressive feelings, that is really harmful during this time, especially when there's a lot of information out there that's not accurate. And so helping our teens sort of monitor that they are engaging in appropriate information and appropriate ways in our media is really important. And then, like I said, I'm going to mention routine on all of these different ages. Routine is really important, especially for our quarantines, because they are wanting to not always do the exact same schedule as everyone else in their house. They might want to have some of their own time. And so helping them have a routine that might be their own routine that involves, regular meals and staying hydrated, and really having as many activities as possible to sort of keep their time occupied and potentially distracted from some of the stress that's going on, whether that's exercising or drawing or baking, working in the kitchen, music, whatever some of those interests are. And we know that staying socially connected for all of us, and especially for this age group, is really important. So finding ways to make sure that that's part of the routine as well. Okay, so now I'd like to move on to talk about adults. And many adults during this time are the primary ones in the family that are managing sort of the overall feelings of fear and stress. So illness, unemployment, a loss of salaries, or those that have lost their jobs, people struggling with mental health symptoms. There may be people that never used to struggle with mental health symptoms, but are now experiencing some symptoms of anxiety or depression. And certainly those that have already struggled with symptoms, their symptoms, some of them have been exacerbated now. So adults are sort of the ones that are managing much of this. And so we want to keep that in mind as we talk about all of our adult populations. The first adult population I want to talk about is our single adults. And actually, relationship experts right now say that this may just be one of our most vulnerable populations. And when you think about it, there's a lot of attention given to young families now. They're talking a lot about how parents, and we're going to talk about this too, but how parents are having to juggle uh, homeschooling, working from home, having kids home, having partners home, having other family members home, maybe trying to help the older population in their family. There's a lot of attention given to our elders and our seniors during this time because they're a high risk population and they're possibly isolated. But some of the invisible people during this time are our well-bodied, singled adults that might have become really isolated and really alone if they're living alone and not in contact as much with others. And so it's part of our responsibility as a community and as people to reach out to those people that are alone. It's our job to check on them. I'm gonna keep referring to some of the online platforms and some of the social media, but there are such creative ways people are connecting now. I just talked to someone who does their virtual yoga dates with their other yogis every morning, briefly. There's people that are doing digital karaoke parties or going on WhatsApp to connect with people all over the world for birthday parties. And so we can all contribute to this. We can invite other people to be a part of this. We can connect with the people that are living alone. And social media has become a lifeline. But I do want to say that similar to our adolescents, one recommendation I have is being not only creative about how we're using social media, but really purposeful. So we all are at risk for being too bombarded by the messages in the media, being too overwhelmed by too much time on screens. All of us are at risk for that. And so we can all sort of have that experience where we become sort of numb or like a glazed look because we have just spent so much time consuming some of those images and messages. So people that, especially those that live alone, that social media is one of their main ways to connect, I encourage them to be really purposeful about when they're on social media and when they're using some of the online platforms so that they don't get too burnt out or overwhelmed by that. Routine fits for everyone, and of course I'll keep mentioning that there are ways to connect if people aren't having as much connection and want to seek therapy or mental health services as an additional resource. This is a time to do that as well. Now, also thinking about our adults, we need to think about those that are coupled. We've all heard those jokes during this time that say something like, have you recently noticed, and then they list all the negative qualities about your partner, right? Have you recently noticed how loud your partner talks? Or have you recently noticed that cleanliness is not your partner's strong suit? If so, you may be married during a pandemic, or you may be coupled during a pandemic. And there's a reason that those are going around, because that is absolutely people's experience. We're having a lot of time together. And after questions about children, the very next most common question that I have received is, how do I manage this time at home with the other people that I live with when they're driving me crazy? And there's so much focus on that. We have new terms that have been coined. We have the COVID divorces, we have the Corona babies, right? The full spectrum, the full range of what could be happening in homes. And as we talk about couples, I want to be clear that I am talking about sort of a couple relationship, but it really can apply to anybody that's trying to live together, because people are finding more and more time together. And for couples, they're finding opportunities to discuss. Some couples are finding opportunities and this time to allow them to discuss things as they arise. But for other people, this has become a time where all the topics that they have potentially been avoiding or not wanting to talk about or not dealing with is sort of right there in front of them, in their face right now. And as Brene Brown would say, our scholar and researcher and academic social worker would say that we are all physically, emotionally, and spiritually exhausted right now. So I can't think of a worse time to really hash out any of our problems when we're already very taxed emotionally and physically. So here's where it gets pretty tricky. The idea of having more time together, and what I want you all to know about any age group and about all of us, is that we all are grieving at some level right now. We all have lost something, our routine, our predictability, our sense of safety. And so we do go through a grief process. And sometimes people don't realize that they're grieving, and that becomes even trickier because they're not as aware of how they're responding or why they're responding in certain ways. They can't be quite as patient with themselves or as understanding when they have these different emotions. And with couples or people that live together, we all grieve in different ways, and we all grieve at different paces and different times. And this can be really hard. You could have one person at home that's in complete panic mode, feeling really anxious and wondering if this pandemic will ever end, right? And you might have the other partner that is at home feeling really sad and not able to move into action mode yet, even though their partner is in complete action mode, because the way they're managing their panic is by trying to consume and to get set up and be prepared. So those two different experiences can be really hard on relationships. You might have one partner that's really irritable because that's a really common experience during grief. And you might have the other partner that feels quite grateful because they're looking at the world and realizing that they are healthy while other people aren't healthy, or some of the other pieces they might be grateful about. So during these times of uncertainty and grief, what we do is we try to find ways to control. We want to have a sense of control, and we do that by justifying our feelings or rationalizing why it's happening. And in our relationships, it's common for us to do that about the other person. Okay. So one way for us to have control is to justify or rationalize. If my partner could just understand where I was coming from, how could my partner ever think this way about this pandemic? Right? If my partner could just help me organize around the house a little bit more. And so we can sort of justify why we're feeling this way and sometimes blame others for it. Or we try to manipulate our relationships as a way to have some control. And we all do this in some way, shape, or form. But sometimes we do it more when things feel out of control. So we might act a certain way, behave a certain way, interact in a certain way, as a way to sort of manipulate the relationship, because then we can predict what the response is going to be. We can predict sort of the interaction. And what we really need to be doing is to let each other grieve in the way that each other needs to grieve. So we need to first acknowledge that people are grieving and allow each other to do that. And again, to think about Brene Brown in her research on vulnerability, we need to be a bit more vulnerable. And to do this, we want to say, what is it that we're feeling? What is it that we're needing? And a little bit less angry, right? A little bit less critical, a little bit less blaming, and a little bit more patient. Partners don't necessarily see eye to eye at this time. We might not agree on how bad this pandemic is. We might not agree on what people are doing right, what people are doing wrong. We don't have to agree with each other. It doesn't mean that the other person is wrong. It means that we're handling this differently. And we must remember that we're all surviving a pandemic right now. We don't know how to do this. This is uncharted territory, and we must, as much as we can, be patient with each other through this. No one knows exactly the perfect way to manage during this time. So I'll go back to my comments about routine. If you can develop some routine, and in that schedule, if you can allow for couples to have some alone time, couples thrive on a healthy balance between time spent together and time spent apart. So allowing for there to be some separate time, even in close quarters, if you can allow for what we say in couples therapy and couples counseling is that you can make an appointment for your fight or your disagreement. And what you're doing is carving out time to talk about a hard topic. And what the goal is that you sort of confine that disagreement to that time instead of letting it bleed into all other areas of your life. And so if you can make an appointment for your disagreement and talk about it during that time, and hopefully that doesn't involve the kids. It's not helpful to have kids be a part of those discussions between parents. And then connecting with others. All of us need to be connecting with others, not just the people that are in our house, and especially people that are alone, which might be some of the seniors in our community. And so on the next slide, I talk about our seniors and our elders. And this population has been one of the greatest concerns during this time because of the sheltering in and the isolation, and because of their lack of physical contact with people, which we know in general affects our overall mental health in general, but also has a huge impact on us physically. So physical touch, eye contact, all of those pieces about connecting with other people, we know releases hormones in our body that can actually enhance our immune system, can have a huge impact on how our body functions. And we know that it does the same for mental health. But this is also the population that is most at risk for illness and disease, and during this pandemic is most at risk for the COVID diagnosis. So one thing that we need to think about is the fear that our aging population and our seniors in our community could be experiencing for their own worries about illness, their own worries and fear about how much their schedule has changed. They're not able to connect in their relationships maybe as much. Now, these suggestions don't fit for all people that are seniors in our community, but for some, using technology and connecting through online platforms is not their usual way of connecting. For some of them are no longer in the workforce where they're using technology on a regular basis. So right now, many people are completely reliant on using online platforms and technology as a way to stay connected. And for some of our seniors, that is not within their comfort or within their skill set to know exactly how to do that. And so some of the ways that the rest of us are managing are reduced and aren't as possible for this particular age group. So again, I will say that as a community member, it is our job to reach out to people. I have talked about companionship here on this slide, and this goes for all ages, of course, but I wanted to put it in here into this talk about the benefits of human-animal connections. And especially since we don't know how long the period of time will be that we could be socially distant or self-isolating, in self-isolation. Being able to connect and have some companionship, some connection is really important. And I never want to discount the significance that animals can play in our health and our well-being. So people that are really alone, it can be really helpful to connect with animals during this time as well. We also have lots of families that are estranged and aren't talking to the rest of their family. And throughout our life, we use each other for emotional support or practical support. And as we age and may need additional sort of help or resources in some of those ways, we need to reach out and check with people. And that is the key. The main way to do this is to ask people, how are you doing? What do you need? What can I do for you? In fact, the coronavirus has given us an excuse to check in on each other. In some ways, it has been very beautiful. People that aren't always talking or always connecting with each other are connecting now. In some ways, this pandemic is an excuse to reach out to people. And I hope that you all will use it as an excuse and to connect with loved ones or people that you just haven't been as in contact with as much lately. The one other piece I want to talk about on the next slide is that I would be remiss to not mention the downside of um, of sort of unhealthy parts of our relationship, and the downside of being socially isolated and potentially being at home when that isn't a safe place for everyone. In our family, whether that's genetic families, adopted families, however we're defining family, can be a place of disconnection and rejection and abandonment for some people. So family relationships don't always offer the type of support and care that's in our idealistic way. And for some people, their family actually is not a safe place or safe people to be with. Our children sometimes use school for food, but they might use it for safety or for therapeutic care. Maybe they have a counselor there, or stability, some of the adult relationships, the peer relationships, or just having a clear routine. And they've lost that during this time. We know that the frequency and severity of domestic violence will increase during this pandemic. In fact, we already have indications of domestic violence incidences on the rise. In fact, at the end of March in New York, domestic violence incidence reports, and these are ones that were reported, were already up 10% more than this time last year. And it does, domestic violence, we know from our research and our literature that domestic violence spikes during times of high stress or financial crisis or natural disasters. People that experience unemployment, there's a strong correlation in our research between unemployment and substance abuse has a strong connection with violence, the more that people are using substances. We also know that gun sales increase anytime there's uncertainty or crisis. So we've already seen a surge in gun sales in our country, similar to what we saw after 9/11 or other times where people were feeling uncertainty or not feeling safe. And some of the typical strategies that we have for helping people during times of crisis where they're not safe, because of domestic violence or abuse, some of those strategies are being interrupted right now. So the idea of people leaving when they can't, if they're sheltered in place, or many of our courts are currently closed, or sexual assault victims might be nervous to sort of go to hospitals. And child abuse cases have already increased also. So families are stuck at home, there's high stress. We already talked about the substance abuse, the potential other stressors that people are experiencing. And actually the statistics showed just the opposite in terms of numbers with child abuse, which is when child abuse numbers go down, that becomes a little bit scarier for child welfare advocates, because what we know from the research is that the abuse is not stopping, but the reports are potentially not being reported as much, which means that we can't check in on it and try to help people. I saw a statistic in Oregon this past week where in the Oregon State Child Abuse Hotline, their reports of child abuse have dropped half. And they used to have around 700 calls daily, and now they've had 300 since the schools have been closed. And so this is really worrisome for the child welfare advocates, because the belief is that maybe classrooms or doctors or teachers or other people aren't reporting on their behalf. So as much as that is hard to know and to realize is happening, I also want to tell you that at the end of these slides, I have some resources and information for you. And I will offer this handout that was created by my graduate assistant, Dennis Goldenson, to the alumni office, and I have it as well. So I'm happy to share it with you because I know there's a lot of information on here to read, but there's specific numbers that everyone can access and reach if you know of somebody that might not be safe, or if you yourself are not safe, or if you just want to know better ways to help or support, as well as lots of articles and additional reading on here about how to manage family relationships, how to deal with specific stressors during this time. So I'll make that handout available to you. And I just want to tell you to please keep in mind that we're all surviving during this time, and relationships really are our lifeline. We need to protect them and nurture them and really focus on them because we need them, and they have a huge impact on how well we feel physically and our mental health. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Venker. First and foremost, I want to just thank you for your time this morning to present on this important topic. I hope that it shed some light on experiences and relationships that we're all working through and dealing with during this time. I do want to open it up to questions now. If anyone on the call has any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature in the Zoom menu, and then we can field those through Dr. Banker. I want to jump back, Dr. Banker, to maybe families with children. I know an important theme in this presentation was a sense of routine and creating routines. Do you have any suggestions or practical tips for parents and families that are struggling maintaining their own routine, that are also trying to create routines for children's and teens in their family?
Yeah, I think you're right. It can be really tricky, and we're all juggling so much at home. And some people just aren't as good at routine as other people. Some people really thrive on routine. In my household, I can say that my husband is not somebody that is routine. And so routine is actually difficult for him. So we have a full range of how that works. And I would say that if you can start small, so try to incorporate 2 or 3 things every day that you want to make sure happens every day. So 2 to 3 things that can start to become routine. So those things like eating together, having a bedtime routine, making sure that everybody exercises, or even the morning routine, that people eat breakfast and then they as simple as things like brush your teeth or wash your face, those types of simple, smaller activities that are very manageable, ones that we can actually do, can really help people have a sense of predictability and have them have some consistency, which is what helps people feel like they have more control and helps them feel safe. So I would say, as much as possible, start small, which is adding in a few things into your day that you say, we have to do this each day. And if those go really well, you can start to add more and more, but start in a reasonable way and start small.
That's great, thank you. And then kind of a general question about all relationships. Now that we're all self-isolated in our homes with family members, what about the importance of alone time? I know you kind of touched on that a little bit, but suggestions or tips for kind of building in personal time into these routines and making sure that you know we're not overly connected, if that's if that's a possibility with our family members and those that we're quarantined with.
Yeah, great. Oh gosh, it's hard. It's hard depending on the amount of space that we have, how we're utilizing that space, the amount of time that we have, and then all the responsibilities that people are juggling. I would say that some amount of quiet time is important for everybody in the household. And so whether you want to call it alone time, whether you want to call it downtime or quiet time, it is really important that we try to acknowledge that everybody needs that in some way. That would be time where we don't necessarily have a screen that's throwing lots of different messages or images at us. This could be time that people read. This could be time that people draw. This could be time that people color. And that quiet time also ends up giving each of us a moment to sort of think some of our own thoughts. For people with young children, some of my quiet time is when they're asleep. So if once they go to sleep, we have some of our downtime afterwards, but that's not the structure that everybody has at their house. So you're right. It is really important that people can have a time where they feel that they have some of their own space. For people that are able to exercise, going out for a walk, having some time that we know is helping with the endorphins and helping us with our mental health, but is also our own time to think and is separate from other people. If you have that kind of setup available that you can have alone time in that way, can be really helpful. With small children, I like to call it quiet time, because then people are still able to, parents still able to see each other, but it's time where there's not interaction and you can have time alone.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Um, so one last question that's come in. It says, I'm struggling with an older adult parent that's not in the house who is acting like a rebellious teenager. Any suggestions?
Hmm. I have heard this a number of times, especially family members that are really concerned because the older adult is somebody that could be high risk and is certainly putting others at high risk if they're not staying home, but continuing to do so. And we, as family members and loved ones, only have so much control over that. Um, I think it's a hard spot to be in. And really, my only suggestion is if there's a way that you can change your perspective about what is happening to be a more balanced perspective. So, a perspective about what you do have control over and what you don't have control over, because we only have so much control over what others are doing. And as much as we can try, if possible, to try to understand where some of that behavior or that response is coming from. I did mention that everybody is sort of grieving and is underneath is often feeling um, either scared, and even rebellion can be a response to that. And trying to understand where some of that is coming from can help us try to connect with that person or find a way to talk to them about what they're experiencing. But if you can try to go easy on yourself and a little bit easy on them as well, because having that patience and having a more balanced perspective about how they're managing and dealing with this is the only way that we can really be effective in our relationships right now.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Benker. So we'll wrap it up in the interest of time. We're just about at the hour. So again, I want to extend a huge thank you to Dr. Jamie Benker for taking the time to present this morning on that important topic. We'll be sure to connect with Dr. Benker to share those resources with everyone that was on the call, as well as a recording of this webinar. Just a quick plug, I hope you'll save the date and join us later this week on Thursday at 10 a.m. Biology professor Dr. Paloma Vargas will be presenting on life in the times of COVID-19, a look kind of into this pandemic and how to keep yourselves and your loved ones safe. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. Again, thank you, Dr. Benker, and thank you to everyone that was on the call today. I hope you all stay safe and take care of each other.